The millionaire's car broke down on a deserted street. A poor girl appeared and fixed the problem by herself. He thanked her, but something about her necklace made the world stand still. It was the same necklace of the woman he had loved and lost. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The silver Porsche 911 GT3 was a fish out of water on that forgotten street in the outskirts. Richard Morgan adjusted his Italian tie, an automatic gesture born of discomfort as he watched smoke escaping from the car's hood. Sweat ran down his forehead, staining the collar of his custom-made shirt that cost more than what many residents of that area earned in a month. The street, a mosaic of potholes and forgotten dreams, seemed to mock his presence. His cell phone, the latest model and equally useless at that moment, didn't show even a single bar of signal. Richard ran his hand through his perfectly trimmed grey hair, feeling frustration grow. A crucial meeting awaited him on the other side of the city, and there he was, stuck in that scenario that represented everything he had always avoided in his life. The unrelenting midday sun transformed the car's interior into a greenhouse. Richard opened the door, resigned to the need to leave his climate-controlled comfort zone. The hot air hit him like a punch, and the smell of burnt oil mixed with the street dust made his aristocratic nose contract in disgust. It was then that she appeared. Like an unlikely apparition, a girl emerged from the corner carrying a tattered backpack almost bigger than herself. Her bare feet slid with familiarity over the uneven asphalt, as if each crack was an old acquaintance. Her dress, several sizes larger than necessary, had stains that told stories Richard preferred not to imagine. The girl stopped a few meters from the car, her curious eyes fixed on the vehicle as if she were in front of a modern art exhibition. There was no fear in her gaze, only a genuine curiosity that disconcerted Richard. He was used to looks of envy, admiration, or resentment, but that analytical neutrality caught him off guard. "What do you want?" Richard's voice came out harsher than he intended, an automatic reflex built over years of dealing with people who always wanted something from him. The girl didn't respond immediately. She continued her silent analysis of the car, circling it with calculated steps. Her eyes, a deep green that somehow seemed familiar in a way Richard couldn't quite place, settled on the smoke still escaping from the hood. "Your car is sick," she finally said, with a simplicity that made Richard raise his eyebrows. "Can I take a look?" Before he could answer, she was already diving into her ragged backpack, her skinny arms disappearing up to the elbows. When she emerged, she was holding an old screwdriver with a peeled handle revealing layers of use and stories. "I don't need your help," Richard responded dryly, but something in the girl's silent determination prevented him from being more emphatic in his refusal. The girl shrugged, a surprisingly mature gesture for someone so young. "All right, but your car won't. Leave here on its own, and from the looks of it, your cell phone isn't working either." Richard stared at her, surprised by the perceptiveness of her observation. It was at that moment that he noticed something shining on her neck, a silver necklace with a translucent blue pendant. The object caused an inexplicable commotion in his chest, as if an old memory was trying to emerge from the depths of his consciousness. While his mind was still processing that disturbing sensation, the girl had already approached the hood. With a resourcefulness that defied her fragile appearance, she maneuvered the screwdriver with surgical precision, making adjustments that seemed absurd but somehow made sense in her own logic. "Try starting it now," she commanded, after a few minutes of silent work. Richard hesitated, divided between his natural skepticism and the lack of alternatives. He turned the key, and to his complete surprise, the engine responded with a healthy roar, as if it had never had any problem at all. But it wasn't the mechanical miracle that kept Richard paralyzed at the wheel. It was the moment when the girl leaned over to retrieve her tool, and the necklace swung under the sunlight. The letters engraved on the thin metal rim were almost imperceptible, but to Richard, they were like a scream from the past. "To Helen, my eternal love, R.M." The world seemed to spin in slow motion as Richard tried to process what his eyes had just seen. That necklace. He himself had commissioned it 12 years ago in a small jewelry shop in Amsterdam. Every detail had been designed to reflect Helen's personality. The blue of the pendant exactly reproduced the color of her eyes, and the inscriptions were hand-engraved by the best craftsmen in the city. Where did you get that necklace? Richard's voice came out trembling, unrecognizable even to himself. The girl instinctively held the pendant, as if protecting a treasure. Her eyes, previously curious, now displayed a mixture of distrust and protection. "It was my mother's," she answered simply, taking a step back. "Your mother?" Richard felt his heart accelerate. What was her name? Helen. The answer came after a moment of hesitation. Helen Rodriguez. Richard needed to lean on the car for support. That name, which he had tried to bury deep in his memory for so long, now resurfaced like a whirlwind, bringing with it a flood of memories and unanswered questions. Where is she now? The words came out before he could contain them, though something deep inside already anticipated the answer. The girl looked away, her fingers still clutching the pendant. She got very sick, lung problems. It's been 3 years since she... Her voice failed, unable to complete the sentence. Richard closed his eyes, feeling as if something inside him was being torn apart. Helen, his Helen, had passed without him knowing. But there in front of him was a girl who carried not only the necklace he had given to the woman he had loved, but also her eyes, those same green eyes that had haunted him in dreams for so long. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sophie," she replied, still maintaining a cautious distance. "Sophie Rodriguez." Sophie. The name echoed in Richard's mind like a revelation. Mentally, he began to do the math. The girl appeared to be about 11 or 12 years old. Helen had disappeared from his life exactly 12 years ago, without explanation, leaving only a letter that had never made sense to him. "Sophie, how old are you?" 12, she answered, and the confirmation hit Richard like lightning. The sweat now wasn't just from the heat. His hands trembled slightly as he held the steering wheel, trying to organize the thoughts that were stumbling in his mind. 12 years. Helen had left when she was 2 months pregnant. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Where do you live, Sophie?" The question came out with an urgency he couldn't disguise. The girl hesitated, her eyes, Helen's eyes, studying him with a wisdom beyond her years. "Around," she answered vaguely, adjusting the backpack on her shoulder in a gesture that suggested she was ready to run at the slightest sign of danger. "Let me help you," Richard said, surprising himself with the softness he found in his voice. "You need a place to stay, food." "I don't need help," Sophie cut him off, raising her chin in a gesture of pride that made Richard's heart clench. "I know how to take care of myself. I always have." But there was something in her eyes, a shadow of loneliness that Richard immediately recognized. It was the same one he saw in his own reflection every morning. The girl began to move away, her bare feet leaving soft marks in the dust of the street. "Sophie, wait!" Richard called, but she had already turned the corner, disappearing as suddenly as she had appeared. Sitting at the wheel of his now perfectly functioning Porsche, Richard Morgan, the man who had built an empire from nothing, who negotiated millions, with a single phone call felt completely lost. The crucial meeting on the other side of the city no longer mattered. Nothing mattered anymore except the truth that was beginning to form in his mind. That girl with Helen's eyes and the necklace he himself had commissioned could be his daughter. In the days that followed, Richard could barely concentrate on his executive meetings. The image of Sophie and that necklace wouldn't leave his mind. His office on the top floor of the city's largest business building, once his refuge and pride, now seemed like a glass and steel prison. Through the panoramic windows, his eyes scanned the streets below as if they could find that small figure with the tattered backpack. "Mr. Morgan." His secretary's voice brought him back to reality. "Investigator Winters is here." Mark Winters entered the room with the discretion that had made him the most sought-after professional in the city. Tall, with grey hair and a well-cut but unpretentious suit, he could easily pass for another executive in the building. "I found some information about Helen Rodriguez," said Winters, sitting in the leather armchair in front of Richard's desk. "She did have a daughter, Sophie, registered only with the mother's name. She worked as a literature teacher at a public school until she got sick. Serious respiratory problems took her away from work 3 years before her—" Winters paused, choosing his words. "Before her passing." Richard felt a lump in his throat. And the girl? What happened to her afterward? Officially, she was placed under the custody of Rebecca Rodriguez, Helen's sister. But there are records of neglect. Reports Sophie ran away from her aunt's house about 8 months ago. Since then, she has been living on the streets. Rebecca. That name triggered a wave of memories in Richard. Helen's older sister had always shown a barely disguised resentment toward their relationship. Now she was a well-known figure in the city, host of a television program about family and traditional values. "I need more," said Richard, getting up and walking to the window. "I want to know everything about the last 12 years. Why Helen left, why she never told me about the pregnancy." "There's something interesting," Winters interrupted, removing a folder from his briefcase. "I found records of a letter sent to your old address about 2 months after Helen's departure. The letter never reached you." Richard turned abruptly. "What do you mean it never reached me? Who intercepted it?" "I'm still investigating, but there are indications that Rebecca was involved. At the time, she worked as an assistant in the same building where you lived." The businessman sat down again, feeling the weight of the revelations. The only letter he had received from Helen was a cold farewell, saying she needed to follow her own path and asking him not to look for her. Those words had never matched the woman he had known, had loved. "And there's more," continued Winters. "Helen tried to contact you other times. I found records of calls made to your office, all blocked by your then secretary, Martha Turner." "Martha?" Richard frowned. "She was recommended by—" "Rebecca," completed Winters. The two maintained frequent contact. Richard stood up again, anger beginning to replace confusion. For 12 years he had believed that Helen had simply abandoned him. Now he discovered he had been the victim of an elaborate plot, orchestrated by people he trusted who claimed they only wanted what was best for him. "I need to find Sophie," he said finally. "She's my daughter, Winters, I'm sure of it, and I won't lose another minute of her life." "I've already started mapping the areas where she's typically seen," replied the investigator. "But I need to warn you, Rebecca won't make things easy. She's built a strong public image based on family values. A story like this could scratch her reputation." "I don't care about her reputation," Richard cut him off. "I just want my daughter back." That night, alone in his penthouse, Richard held an old photo of Helen. In it, the young teacher smiled, her green eyes shining with the same intensity he now saw in Sophie. Beside him on the table, a pile of documents began to tell a different story from the one he had believed for so long. A story of manipulation, lies, and a family that had been stolen from him even before it was born. Sophie knew every alley and lane of that neighborhood like the back of her hand. Sitting on the ledge of an abandoned building, her legs dangled in the void as she shared a package of cookies with Michael, her only true friend on the streets. The boy, a year older than her, had dark, always alert eyes and an easy smile that masked his own story of abandonment. "So he's rich?" asked Michael, taking another cookie. "Like really rich?" Sophie shrugged, adjusting the necklace around her neck, a gesture that had become a reflex whenever she was nervous. "I guess so. His car cost more than this entire street." "And why didn't you accept his help?" The question hung in the air for a few moments. Sophie watched the sun setting between the buildings, painting the sky in orange tones that her mother had so adored. Helen always said that late afternoons were magical, moments when the universe paused to breathe. "I don't trust adults," she finally replied. "They always want something in return." Michael nodded, understanding perfectly. Both carried invisible scars of broken promises and betrayed trust. "But he seemed different," he argued. "You said he got weird when he saw your mom's necklace." Sophie touched the blue pendant again. "He knew my mom," she said softly. "I saw it in his eyes, and he had the same initials as the engraving." "RM," recited Michael, who had heard the story of the necklace dozens of times. "Richard Morgan?" A noise in the street caught the attention of both. A black car, discreet but evidently expensive, passed slowly for the third time in that hour. Sophie recognized the driver, the same man in a suit she had seen talking to Richard a few days before. "He's looking for me," she murmured, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. "This could be good." "Sophie," Michael said, his voice more serious than usual, "what if he really is your father?" The word father caused a knot in Sophie's stomach. It was an abstract concept in her life, a figure her mother rarely mentioned and always with teary eyes. Helen had never spoken ill of him, but she had never explained why he wasn't part of their lives either. "My mom must have had a reason for not telling him about me," argued Sophie, more to herself than to Michael. "Or maybe someone didn't let her tell him," countered Michael. During the months they had spent together on the streets, he had become not just a friend, but a confidant who knew every detail of Sophie's story. "You always said your Aunt Rebecca controlled everything. The letters, the phone calls." Sophie felt a shiver as she remembered her aunt, Rebecca, with her artificial TV host smile and her suffocating rules. The same one who locked her in the room when there were visitors, who tore up the drawings she made of her mother, who said Helen had been weak and foolish. He seemed sad, Sophie admitted, remembering Richard's expression when he saw the necklace, as if he had lost something important. "Maybe he did lose something," Michael said softly. "You and your mom." The sun had completely disappeared, leaving only a purple trail on the horizon. The first stars began to appear shy among the clouds. Sophie remembered how her mother used to point to them, inventing stories about each constellation. "Sometimes," Sophie began, her voice just a whisper, "when I'm almost asleep, I remember her voice. Mom used to say that true love always finds its way back no matter how long it takes." Michael smiled, putting his arm around his friend's shoulders. "Then maybe that's what's happening now. Love finding its way back." Sophie didn't respond, but her fingers pressed the blue pendant harder. Down below, the black car passed again, slower this time. In her chest, something she couldn't name, fear, hope, or a mixture of both, began to grow. Rebecca Rodriguez adjusted the microphone attached to the lapel of her impeccable blazer, while production assistants rushed around the studio, making final adjustments. Her show, Family First, was a ratings leader in its time slot, and she had built her career on an image of a defender of traditional values and protector of children. 3 minutes, shouted the director. She smiled at the mirror, rehearsing the expression of sincere concern she would use to talk about the day's topic, children living on the streets. The irony didn't escape her, but years of practice had made it easier to ignore the pangs of conscience. Her cell phone vibrated. The name of Martha, Richard's former secretary and her longtime informant, flashed on the screen. Rebecca felt her stomach sink as she read the message. "He's investigating the past. Found Winters. 1 minute." Rebecca took a deep breath, forcing herself to maintain composure. 12 years of carefully guarded secrets threatened to crumble. The intercepted letter, the blocked calls, the altered documents, everything could come to light. On air in 5, 4, 3, the cameras lit up and Rebecca assumed her role, smiling at millions of viewers. "Good evening, dear American family. Today we're going to talk about a topic that breaks my heart, our abandoned children." But while she spoke about compassion and social responsibility, her mind was miles away, reviewing the events that had brought her here. Helen, her younger sister, had always been the favorite, the pretty one, the smart one, the special one. Even when she fell in love with the rising businessman Richard Morgan, everyone thought it was a fairy tale. Rebecca observed everything closely, nurturing a resentment that grew with each smile exchanged between the couple, with each loving look. When Helen became pregnant, Rebecca saw her chance. A forged letter here, some intercepted calls there, and the fairy tale crumbled. "Cut! 5-minute break." Rebecca quickly rose, going to her dressing room. She had barely closed the door when her phone rang again. It was her lawyer. Richard Morgan is requesting all documents related to Sophie's custody, he informed without preamble. And there's more. He has hired a team to do a DNA test. He can't do that, Rebecca hissed. I have legal custody. Custody that you obtained with questionable documents, the lawyer reminded her. If this goes deep, Rebecca, I don't know if we can keep the story standing. Rebecca hung up the phone in anger. On the dressing room vanity, an old photo caught her attention. She and Helen as teenagers, hugging and smiling. It was the last photo they took together before Rebecca began building the wall of resentment that would end up separating them forever. Rebecca, 2 minutes. She returned to the studio, more determined than ever. She hadn't come this far to lose everything now. Her reputation, her career, her carefully constructed life. Everything depended on keeping Sophie away from Richard, and she would do anything to ensure that. On air in 5/4, back on camera, Rebecca smiled again, personifying the image of the presenter concerned with social welfare. But her eyes, if anyone looked carefully, revealed the growing panic of someone watching their castle of lies begin to crumble. In her purse, the cell phone vibrated. Once more. It was a message from an unknown number. Found something in the hospital archives, Sophie's original birth certificate, with the father's name. Rebecca felt cold sweat run down her back, but maintained her professional smile. The studio lights seemed increasingly hot, suffocating. Like the walls of the room where she locked Sophie, like the weight of the secrets she had carried for 12 years. And now, dear viewers, her voice didn't betray the inner turmoil. Let's talk about the importance of truth in our families. Richard parked his car, now purposely more discreet than the Porsche, near the abandoned building where Winters had located Sophie. In his hands, he carried a bag with snacks, water, and, hidden at the bottom, a DNA collection kit. His heart was racing, mixing anxiety and fear of frightening her again. She's up there, informed Winters, observing from his own car. With her usual friend. Richard nodded, taking a deep breath before beginning to climb the stairs of the building. The place was deteriorated with peeling walls and broken windows, but he could see signs of life. A folded blanket here, a water bottle there, small indications that this space had become a refuge. When he reached the top floor, he found Sophie and Michael sitting on the ledge, sharing a package of cookies. The scene made his heart ache, his daughter living like this while he lived in a luxury penthouse. "Hi, Sophie," he said softly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. The girl turned quickly, instinctively holding the necklace. Michael positioned himself slightly in front of her, protective. "How did you find me?" Sophie asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "I needed to see you," Richard answered honestly. "I brought some things for you both." He offered the bag, which Michael took after an approving look from Sophie. The boy examined the contents, taking out the sandwiches and water bottles. "Why are you doing this?" Sophie asked, still not approaching. Richard sat on a piece of concrete, keeping his movements slow and predictable. "Because I care, because I want to get to know you, and because..." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because I think you're much more important to me than I imagined." Sophie exchanged a look with Michael, who nodded slightly. She approached a bit, still cautious but less defensive. "You really knew my mom, didn't you?" she asked, touching the necklace. "You're the one who gave her this." "Yes," Richard confirmed. His voice choked. "I loved your mother, Sophie, more than I've ever loved anyone in my life, and when she left..." He swallowed hard. "It was as if a part of me had gone away too." "Then why did you never look for us?" The question came out like an accusation, laden with years of absence. "Because I didn't know," Richard answered, feeling the weight of each word. "I never knew you existed. If I had known..." His voice failed. "If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to be with you both." Sophie studied his face for a long moment, as if looking for signs of deceit. Michael, who had approached, offered her a sandwich. "Mom always said my father was a good man," Sophie finally spoke, accepting the sandwich. but Aunt Rebecca said he abandoned us, that he didn't care. Richard felt anger growing at the mention of Rebecca's name, but kept his voice calm. Your aunt, she didn't tell the whole truth, Sophie. There's much more to this story. Like what? Like the fact that your mother tried to tell me about you, several times. But someone prevented those messages from reaching me. Sophie frowned, processing the information. Aunt Rebecca always controlled everything. The letters, the phone calls, she said it was to protect us. Protect you from what? Michael asked, breaking his silence. From the world, Sophie answered bitterly. That's what she always said, but in reality she just wanted to control us. Richard observed the two friends, noting the strong bond between them. Sophie, he began cautiously, I know it's a lot to process, but I'd like to do a test that can prove something very important. What kind of test? One that can prove I'm your father. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with possibilities. Sophie looked at Michael, who smiled encouragingly, then at the necklace around her neck and finally at Richard. And if it's true, she asked, her voice small and vulnerable, what happens then? Richard felt tears forming in his eyes. Then we can start building something new. Something true, no lies, no secrets, just us trying to recover lost time. The laboratory was silent and aseptic, a stark contrast to the streets where Sophie had spent the last few months. She watched, uneasy, as the nurse prepared the material for collection. Michael, who had insisted on accompanying her, held her hand firmly. It's just going to be a little prick, the nurse assured with a gentle smile. You're brave, aren't you? Sophie almost laughed. Courage. She had faced cold nights, hunger, fear. A needle was nothing compared to that. Still, her eyes sought Richard, who waited anxiously on the other side of the room. How long until we know? She asked, her voice firmer than she felt. 3 days, replied Richard, checking his watch for the 10th time in the last few minutes. I requested maximum urgency. The nurse finished the collection, placing a small, colorful bandage on Sophie's arm. Richard had already done his part earlier, and now all that remained was to wait. But the wait sometimes can be the hardest part. You must be hungry, said Richard, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. How about we have lunch somewhere? Sophie and Michael exchanged glances. The girl was still hesitant to accept anything beyond the basics, but her friend gave a slight nod of encouragement. I know a place, Michael suggested timidly. A diner nearby. The owner, Ms. Fay, has always been nice to us. Richard smiled, recognizing the importance of that moment. It wasn't just lunch. It was Sophie allowing him to enter a little more into her world. The diner was small and simple, with formica tables and ceiling fans that turned lazily. Ms. Fay, a robust lady with a maternal smile, lit up when she saw the children. Sophie, Michael, I was worried about you, she exclaimed, hugging them. Her curious eyes rested on Richard, discreetly evaluating him. He's... Sophie hesitated, the words caught in her throat. I'm a friend of theirs, Richard completed softly, understanding his daughter's difficulty. As they ate, Richard observed every detail, how Sophie carefully separated the vegetables from her plate, exactly as Helen used to do, how her eyes lit up when she smiled, the same sparkle that had enchanted him years ago. Your mother used to do that too, he commented without thinking, when Sophie pushed a carrot to the corner of her plate. The girl froze, the fork halfway to her mouth. You remember those things about her? I remember everything, Richard replied, his voice laden with emotion. How she hummed while cooking even though she was completely tone-deaf. How she spent hours grading students' papers, making personal comments on each one. How her eyes changed. Color depending on her mood, Sophie completed, a shy smile appearing on her lips. Dark green when she was sad, almost blue when she laughed. Michael observed the interaction in silence, a small smile on his lips. It was the first time he had seen his friend talking about her mother, without that shadow of pain in her eyes. There's something you need to see, Richard said, removing an envelope from his folder. Some old photos from when your mother and I were together. Sophie took the envelope with trembling hands. The photographs showed a young, loving couple, Helen and Richard in a park, at the beach, at a cafe. In each image, the blue pendant. Necklace gleamed on Helen's neck. She was so happy, Sophie murmured, touching her mother's face in one of the photos. We were happy, Richard gently corrected. And after she left, I never found that happiness again, until now. The moment was interrupted by Richard's cell phone. It was Winters. Mr. Morgan, the investigator's voice was tense. We found something. Sophie's original birth certificate. Before the alterations. And there's more, letters, several of them that Helen tried to send to you, all intercepted by Rebecca. Richard felt his heart race. Where? In Helen's old apartment. Rebecca kept everything. And there's something you need to see immediately. It's about the day Helen discovered she was pregnant. Sophie watched Richard attentively, noticing the change in his expression. Did something happen? We found some of your mother's things, he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. Things that may explain a lot. What kind of things? Richard looked at his daughter, because now, even without the test result, his heart already knew the truth. The truth, Sophie. The truth your aunt tried to hide from all of us. Rebecca's office was buzzing with the typical end-of-day agitation, but she barely noticed the movement around her. Her eyes were fixed on the computer screen, where a message from her former secretary flashed insistently. They found the letters. Her hands trembled as she opened the desk drawer, removing an old key she always carried with her, the same key that opened the chest in her house's attic, where she kept the evidence of her obsession. Every letter Helen had tried to send to Richard, every photo she had stolen, every document she had altered. The phone rang, making her start. It was her lawyer again. Rebecca, we have a problem, he began without preamble. Richard Morgan has filed for a paternity investigation, and there's more. He has evidence of document. Tampering? How did he get that? Rebecca hissed, feeling control slipping through her fingers. Apparently, the nurse who cared for Helen during her pregnancy kept copies of everything. She never agreed with what you did. Rebecca hung up the phone abruptly, her mind racing in circles. Outside her office, she could hear the staff preparing for another recording of her show. The irony was palpable. In a few minutes, she would be in front of the cameras talking about honesty and family. Values. Her cell phone vibrated with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made her blood freeze. A photo of the chest in her attic, open, revealing its incriminating contents. At the show's reception, Richard Morgan waited with a folder of documents under his arm. Beside him, Winters held a professional camera. Rebecca observed them through the security monitor, feeling the panic grow. Ms. Rebecca, her assistant called hesitantly, they're demanding to speak with you before the show, and there's a girl with them. Rebecca approached the monitor. Again. There was Sophie, still wearing that damned necklace that tormented her so much. The same jewel that symbolized everything she never had, someone's true love. Send them in, she ordered, resigned. Richard entered first, his eyes hard as steel. Sophie came right after, and for the first time Rebecca noticed how much she resembled Helen, not just physically, but in the way she faced difficult situations with silent strength. It's over, Rebecca, Richard said simply, placing the folder on the table. We found everything. Rebecca opened the folder with trembling fingers. There were all the proofs. Sophie's original birth certificate with Richard's name as father, Helen's letters begging him to look for her, even the diagnosis of the disease. Taret had a treatment, but that Rebecca had convinced Helen was terminal. Why? Sophie's voice cut through the silence, small but firm. Why did you do this to us? Rebecca looked at her niece, seeing for the first time the reflection of all the harm she had caused. Because she had everything, she replied, her voice breaking. Helen always had everything I wanted. Our parents' love, others' respect. You. She looked at Richard. Someone's true love. So you destroyed her life, Richard concluded, his voice trembling with contained anger. Manipulated documents, intercepted letters, lied about the severity of her illness. I just wanted, Rebecca began, but was interrupted by Sophie. You just wanted to control me like you tried to control her, the girl said, her voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years. But you know what Mom always said? That true love can't be controlled, it finds its own way. Rebecca sank into her chair, defeated. Outside, she could hear the director calling for the start of the program, her program about family values and truth. The final irony of her life, built on lies. The small apartment that Richard rented in the residential neighborhood was completely different from his luxurious penthouse. Simple walls, basic furniture, a modest kitchen, all chosen with the thought of not intimidating Sophie. He watched, emotional, as his daughter timidly explored what would be her new room. "You can decorate it however you want," he said, noticing how she carefully touched the bed made up with new sheets. "Paint the walls, put up posters." Sophie nodded, still processing the change in her life. After the confrontation with Rebecca, which resulted in her resignation from the show and a judicial agreement recognizing Richard's paternity, everything had happened very quickly. "Can Michael visit me?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Of course," Richard promptly responded. "In fact," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've talked with the social worker. Michael can stay in the room next door while we look for his family or a permanent solution for him." Sophie's eyes lit up for the first time since they arrived. "Really? He won't have to go back to the streets?" "No," Richard assured. "Neither of you will ever have to go back to the streets." Sophie sat on the bed, her hands automatically seeking the necklace around her neck, a gesture that Richard now recognized as her comfort mechanism. "Mom would be happy," she said softly. "She always said that one day we would find our place." Richard sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Sophie, there's something I wanted to show you." He took an envelope from his pocket. "These are the DNA test results, but before opening them, I want you to know, no matter what's written here, you're already my daughter in my heart." Sophie looked at the envelope, then at Richard. "Do you already know the result?" "No," he answered. "Honestly, I wanted us to open it together." With trembling hands, Sophie took the envelope. For a moment, she just held it, as if weighing the possibilities contained in that paper. "I always imagined what it would be like to have a father," she confessed. "On the coldest nights on the street, I would make up stories. Sometimes he was a superhero, sometimes a teacher like Mom, sometimes," she smiled slightly, "a businessman in a fancy car that broke down on my street." Richard felt tears forming in his eyes, "and I always imagined what it would be like to have a child. Even in the most important moments of my career, I felt something was missing. Now, I know what it was." Sophie took a deep breath and began to open the envelope. Her small hands trembled as she pulled out the paper. Richard watched, his heart beating so hard it felt like it would jump out of his chest. "Probability of paternity," Sophie read aloud, 99.999%. The silence that followed was filled with all the emotions that words couldn't express. Sophie stared fixedly at the paper, as if the letters might change at any moment. "So it's true," she whispered. "You really are my father." "Yes," Richard replied, his voice choked, "and I'm so sorry for all the years we lost. But I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for every moment." Sophie lifted her eyes from the paper, and for the first time since they met, Richard saw the barriers in her gaze beginning to crumble. Slowly, as if testing the limits of this new reality, she moved closer to him. Can I hug you?" she asked timidly. Richard opened his arms, and Sophie threw herself into them, as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. The smell of her hair, the warmth of her small body, the strength with which her arms squeezed him, all of this was new and at the same time familiar, as if his heart had always known this moment would come. "Dad," she whispered against his chest, testing the word for the first time. And in that moment, in that simple apartment with his daughter in his arms and Helen's necklace shining between them, Richard understood that all his pursuit of success and wealth had been just a detour on the path to this moment, the moment when he finally found his true treasure. Michael arrived the next day carrying a tattered backpack with his few belongings. His eyes widened when he saw the room prepared for him, with a new bed and a closet all his own. Sophie was anxiously waiting for him at the door, practically jumping with joy at seeing her friend. "This is for me?" he asked, his voice betraying the emotion he was trying to hide. "It's your home now," Richard replied, observing how the boy carefully touched each piece of furniture, as if checking if they were real. "For as long as you need." The social worker, a middle-aged woman named Nancy Smith, smiled approvingly as she filled out the necessary forms. "It's a temporary situation," she explained, "but it will give us time to look for his family or find a permanent solution." Michael nodded, but his eyes sought Sophie, as they always did in moments of uncertainty. Their friendship, forged in the adversities of the street, was something that Richard was beginning to understand and deeply respect. "We can do homework together," Sophie commented excitedly. "Dad said we'll start school next week." The word "dad" still sounded new in her mouth, but each time she used it, a small smile appeared on her face. Richard noticed how she tested the limits of this new reality, like a person groping in a dark room, looking for light switches. That night, after the children had retired to their rooms, Richard sat on the small balcony of the apartment. The neighborhood was quiet, so different from the bustle of the financial center, where he had spent most of his adult life. Somehow this new environment, simpler and more welcoming, seemed more like a home than his luxurious penthouse had ever been. Sophie appeared silently beside him, still wearing the new pajamas they had bought together. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sitting in the chair next to him. "Just thinking," Richard replied, "about how life takes turns." Sophie played with the pendant of the necklace, a habit that Richard now recognized as something inherited from Helen. "Mom used to say that life is like a river. Sometimes you think you're going in one direction, but you're actually being carried to where you need to be." Richard smiled, recognizing Helen's wisdom in his daughter's words. She was very wise. "Your mother. You know what else she used to say," Sophie continued, her voice soft in the night, "that even when people leave, they leave little pieces of themselves with us, like this necklace, and like her eyes, which are now mine." Richard felt tears forming, "And like the way you separate vegetables on your plate, exactly as she did." Sophie laughed, a crystalline sound that filled the night with joy. From the room next door, they heard Michael cough lightly, and Sophie immediately became alert, concerned for her friend. "He'll be fine," Richard assured. "Tomorrow we'll take him to the doctor for a complete checkup." Sophie visibly relaxed. "Thank you," she said after a moment, "for taking care of him too." "It's the least I can do," Richard replied. "He took care of you when I couldn't." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled only by the soft sounds of the night and the peaceful breathing of father and daughter. Sophie rested her head on Richard's shoulder, a gesture so natural it made his heart leap. "Dad?" she called softly. "Yes? Do you think we'll make it, being a real family?" Richard wrapped his arm around his daughter's shoulders, feeling how she snuggled closer. "We already are a family, Sophie. Different, unlikely, still learning to know each other, but a family. And you know what your mother would say about that?" Sophie smiled, the blue pendant gleaming under the moonlight. "That love finds its own way." "Exactly," Richard agreed, kissing the top of his daughter's head. "And look, it found us." The first day of school arrived with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Sophie nervously adjusted the strap of her new backpack. The first, that didn't have tears or patches, while Michael tried to tame his rebellious hair in front of the bathroom mirror. "What if they ask about before?" Sophie whispered to Michael during breakfast, poking at the scrambled eggs on her plate. Richard, who pretended to be absorbed in the newspaper but didn't miss a word, felt his heart tighten. The children had spent the previous week taking placement tests, and now they would face their first official day at the private school he had carefully chosen. "You don't have to tell anything you don't want to," he said, lowering the newspaper. "Your story is your own, Sophie. You decide what to share and with whom." Michael nodded, swallowing a large piece of bread. "Besides, now we have a new story to tell." The journey to school was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Richard observed through the rearview mirror how Sophie firmly held Helen's necklace, as she always did when she was nervous. Michael, beside her, maintained a protective posture, as if ready to defend his friend from any adversity. At the school entrance, a young teacher greeted them with a welcoming smile. "You must be Sophie," she said, crouching down to the girl's height. "And you, Michael, I'm Ms. Laura. We'll be spending a lot of time together." Sophie offered a small smile, and Richard noticed how she unconsciously moved closer to him. It was a gesture that still surprised him, this growing trust that his daughter demonstrated, seeking protection and security from him. "Mr. Morgan," Ms. Laura called him discreetly while the children were being led to see their lockers. "I want you to know that we've been informed of their special situation. We'll provide all the necessary support." Richard thanked her, but before he could say anything more, he heard a growing murmur in the hallway. A group of students was gathered around a tablet, watching something that seemed very interesting. "It's her," one of the boys pointed to Sophie, "Rebecca Rodriguez's niece." Richard's heart froze. He quickly approached the group and saw on the tablet screen a viral video showing Rebecca's last show, where she, in tears, admitted her mistakes and resigned from her position as host. Sophie had frozen in the middle of the hallway, her face pale. Michael immediately positioned himself by her side like a small guardian. "Sophie," Richard called softly, approaching, "do you want to go home?" But something happened at that moment. Sophie straightened her shoulders, a gesture so similar to Helen's that it made Richard hold his breath. "No," she replied, her voice firm. "Mom always said that running away doesn't solve anything." She walked up to the group of curious students, Helen's necklace shining under the fluorescent lights of the hallway. "Yes, Rebecca is my aunt, but that's not the most important part of my story." Ms. Laura intervened at this moment, gently dispersing the group and leading the children to their classrooms. Before entering the class, Sophie turned to Richard. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Thank you for not giving up on looking for me." Richard swallowed the lump that formed in his throat. "I'll never give up on you, Sophie, never." As he drove back home, Richard reflected on how his life had completely changed in such a short time. His phone rang incessantly with work calls. He had been postponing his previously packed schedule, now reorganized according to school hours, his luxurious penthouse exchanged for a modest apartment. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt truly rich. Rich in love, in purpose, in meaning. Helen was right. Love found its own way. And sometimes, that way passed through unexpected detours, through potholed streets where luxury cars broke down, through encounters that seemed like chance but were, in fact, destiny. On his makeshift work desk, in the EI apartment's living room, a new photo now occupied a prominent place. Him, Sophie, and Michael, smiling on the balcony of their new home. And beside it, an old one. Helen, young and radiant, wearing the necklace that now rested on their daughters. Two images, two moments, one single love story that continued to unfold in ways he could never have imagined. The news came on a Wednesday afternoon through a call from investigator Winters. Richard was helping the children with their math homework when his cell phone vibrated. "We found something in Helen's old apartment," said Winters, his voice laden with contained emotion. "You need to see this." The apartment was exactly as Helen had left it, preserved like a time capsule by Rebecca's obsession. Richard hesitated at the door, feeling the weight of memories. Sophie, who had insisted on coming along, held his hand tightly. "Are you sure you want to go in?" he asked, concerned about the impact that place could have on her. Sophie nodded, her green eyes, Helen's eyes, determined. "I need to know the place where Mom lived." Michael, who also didn't want to be left behind, stayed close, as he always did when he felt Sophie needed support. The apartment was small but cozy, with shelves full of books and dried-out plants on the windowsills. Sophie moved through the space as if she were in a museum, gently touching objects, absorbing every detail. "What did you find, Winters?" Richard asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The investigator pointed to an old chest in the corner of the room. It was hidden behind a false panel. Rebecca never found it. With trembling hands, Richard opened the chest. Inside, there were dozens of notebooks, Helen's diaries, and on top of them, a yellowed envelope addressed to him. "Dad," Sophie called softly, picking up one of the notebooks. "Look at the date. She wrote this when she was pregnant with me." Richard sat on Helen's old bed, the envelope weighing in his hands. Sophie settled beside him, Michael maintaining a respectful but attentive distance. "Dear Richard," he began to read aloud, his voice choked. "If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. I write this letter as a last attempt to tell the truth that Rebecca has tried so hard to hide." Sophie rested her head on her father's shoulder, her small hand still holding her mother's diary. Richard continued reading. "I'm pregnant. Our daughter, yes, I know it's a girl, grows inside me, and each movement reminds me of you. Rebecca has intercepted all my attempts to tell you. She controls my phone calls, my letters, even my steps. She says it's to protect me, but she's actually imprisoning me." Richard paused, taking a deep breath. Sophie squeezed his hand, giving him strength to continue. "But I want you to know, every word of love I said to you was true. Every moment we shared was real, and our daughter will be the living proof of that love. I'm keeping the necklace you gave me for her, your last gift before Rebecca began her campaign to separate us." Michael silently approached, sitting on the floor near them, forming a small circle of trust and mutual support. "If something happens to me, look for her. Find our daughter, Richard. Tell her she was loved from the first moment. Tell her that her father never abandoned us. He simply didn't know we existed. And most importantly, tell her that true love always finds its way." The letter continued, but Richard couldn't go on. Tears blurred his vision, and his voice had completely failed. Sophie gently took the letter from his hands and continued reading. "I'm hiding this chest where Rebecca will never find it. Inside are all my diaries, all the truths I couldn't tell. And most importantly, all the stories I want our daughter to know. She never gave up," Michael commented softly, breaking the silence that followed. "Your mother never gave up on making the truth reach you both." Sophie stood up and walked to the window, exactly as Helen used to do when she was thoughtful. The afternoon sun entered lazily through the glass, making the blue pendant shine on her neck. "Can we take the diaries?" she asked, turning to Richard. "I want to know all the stories she saved for me." Richard nodded, unable to speak. At that moment, in that apartment that held so many memories, he felt Helen more present than ever, not as a painful absence, but as a gentle force that had prepared the way for them to meet, even if she couldn't be there to see it. The nights in the apartment gained a new routine. After dinner, Sophie, Richard, and Michael would gather in the living room to read Helen's diaries. It was like a storytelling session, where each page revealed a new chapter of the past, filling the gaps of 12 years of absence. "Today I felt the first kick," Sophie read aloud, her legs crossed on the sofa. It was as if she was saying, "I'm here, Mommy." I spent the entire afternoon imagining what it would be like to tell Richard, to see his eyes light up with the news. Richard listened with a lump in his throat, imagining all the precious moments he had missed. Michael, sitting on the carpet with his sketchbook, recorded each important moment in delicate illustrations, a hobby he had recently discovered and that Richard encouraged by buying art supplies. "Look at this," Sophie continued, turning the page. She pasted an ultrasound photo here and wrote, "Today I saw your little face for the first time, my little Sophie. I chose your name because it means wisdom, something you'll need to navigate this complicated world that adults have created." Richard stood up, walking to the window to disguise his emotion. The city sparkled outside, indifferent to the small miracle happening in that room, a family rebuilding its history, page by page. "Dad," Sophie called softly, "there's a part here about the day you two met." He returned to the sofa, sitting next to his daughter. Sophie began to read. "Today I met a different kind of man. Not because of his bank account or his imported car, but for the way his eyes light up when he talks about his dreams. Richard has the soul of a boy hidden in an Italian suit." Michael laughed softly. just like what happened with the broken car. Sophie smiled, continuing to read. He gave me a necklace today, a blue pendant that, according to him, matches my eyes. But the real gift wasn't the jewel. It was his look when he placed it around my neck, as if he were giving me not just a necklace, but his entire heart. Richard remembered that moment with perfection. The nervousness when giving the present, Helen's radiant smile, the way the sunset light made the pendant shine as it now shone on his daughter's neck. "There's something else here," Sophie said, removing a folded paper from inside the diary. It was a drawing made by Helen, a sketch of a baby with the same green eyes that now looked at Richard. "Your mother drew as well as you do, Michael," Richard commented, watching the boy now, reproducing Helen's drawing in his own notebook. "She was a literature teacher," Sophie explained to her friend. "But Mom always said that every form of art is a way of telling stories." Michael nodded, concentrating on his drawing. "That's why I like to draw. Each line tells a piece of the story." Sophie flipped through a few more pages of the diary until she stopped at an entry that made her eyes widen. "Dad, listen to this. Rebecca found the letters I tried to send to Richard. Her reaction frightened me. There was something in her eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was a sick obsession. She shouted that I didn't deserve to be happy, that I was ruining her life by having this child." Richard felt the anger growing again, but controlled himself when he saw Sophie's concerned face. "Your aunt was sick, Sophie. Not with a disease of the body, but of the soul." "How can someone get like that?" Michael asked, raising his eyes from his drawing. "So, poisoned inside?" "Sometimes," Richard answered carefully. "People get so lost in their own bitterness that they forget how to love. Rebecca spent so much time envying other people's happiness that she forgot how to build her own." Sophie closed the diary gently, her fingers caressing the worn cover. "Mom wrote here that even in the hardest days she never lost hope. She believed that one day the truth would come out." "And it did," Michael completed, showing his finished drawing. A delicate reproduction of Helen's sketch, but with an additional detail, the blue pendant necklace around the baby's neck. Richard observed the drawing, feeling a wave of emotion. It was more than a simple illustration. It was a testimony to how the past and present intertwined, how Helen's love continued to live through Sophie, and how their family, though different from what anyone could have imagined, was finally complete. "You know what?" Sophie said, resting her head on her father's shoulder. "I think Mom was right about everything. About love finding its way, about the truth always coming out, and about me needing wisdom to understand all this." Richard kissed the top of his daughter's head, while Michael added the last details to his drawing. Outside, night advanced over the city, but inside that apartment, Helen's words illuminated every corner, every heart, every shared moment. Sophie and Michael's school adaptation was progressing better than anyone could have expected. Ms. Laura had become an important ally, creating a safe environment where both could flourish without fear of judgment. That morning, she had called Richard for a special meeting. "Your children are extraordinary, Mr. Morgan," Laura began, spreading some work across her desk. "Sophie has a special talent for writing, just like her mother, from what I've heard. And Michael, well, see for yourself." She showed a series of illustrations that Michael had done for a literature project. They were visual interpretations of children's classics, but with a surprising depth for someone so young. "And there's more," continued the teacher, picking up a notebook. "Sophie wrote this for the family memories project. I think you should read it." Richard took the notebook, immediately recognizing his daughter's neat handwriting. "My family isn't like others. It wasn't born in the traditional way, didn't follow the normal paths. My family was born from a broken car, from a necklace with hidden stories, from secrets that turned into truths. It was born from the love my mother kept in diaries, from my father's heart that never stopped searching, and from the friendship of a boy who became my brother without needing any paper to prove it." "She got the highest grade," Laura smiled. "But more important than that, she's managing to transform her story into something beautiful." Richard agreed, moved. "And Michael? He's been expressing himself through art in an impressive way. I'm going to suggest extra art classes. He has potential to develop a really special talent. Leaving the school, Richard found the two sitting in the courtyard, Sophie reading one of Helen's diaries while Michael drew. It was a scene that had become common, the two always together, one supporting the other in their healing journey. "Ready to go?" he called. On the way home, Sophie couldn't stop talking about the school's new project, a talent show where each student should present something special about their family. "Michael is going to do an exhibition with the drawings he made based on Mom's diaries," she explained excitedly. "And I'm going to read some excerpts I've chosen. Is that okay, Dad?" Richard smiled in the rearview mirror. "Of course it is. Your mother would be proud." "Mr. Richard," Michael called timidly. "The social worker called today. They found my aunt." The car fell silent for a moment. Michael's aunt, his mother's sister, had been located in another city. She was his only living relative. "She wants to meet me," continued Michael, his voice small, but I don't want to leave." Sophie immediately held her friend's hand. "Dad." "Michael," Richard began softly, "nobody is going to force you to do anything. We'll meet your aunt, talk to her, but you're already part of our family regardless of what happens." "Really?" The boy's eyes shone with hope. "Really," Richard confirmed. "Besides, who's going to illustrate all the stories from Helen's diaries if you leave?" Michael smiled, visibly relaxing. Sophie squeezed his hand harder, and Richard realized once again how destiny had curious ways of building families. Team. Home. While the children did their homework at the kitchen table, Richard received a call from Winters. "Rebecca wants to talk," the investigator informed. "She's in psychological treatment and, well, she wants to make peace." Richard looked at Sophie, who was laughing at something Michael had drawn in the margin of her notebook. The blue pendant swung on her neck, catching the afternoon light. "Tell her it's not the time yet," he replied. "But maybe, one day, when Sophie is ready." After hanging up, Richard joined the children at the table. Sophie was reading aloud a passage from the diary where Helen described her dreams for the future, while Michael illustrated each word with his delicate strokes. "Dad," Sophie called suddenly, "can we do something special for Mum's birthday next month?" Richard felt his heart tighten. "What do you have in mind?" "I thought about planting a garden on the balcony. She loved flowers, you know. There are lots of stories in the diaries about the garden she wanted to have." "That's a great idea," Richard smiled. "We can choose the flowers together. And I can design the garden project," Michael offered, already reaching for his sketchbook. Richard observed the two bent over the notebook, planning the garden that would honor Helen. This was how life went on, not erasing the past but building upon it, transforming pain into beauty, absence into presence, memories into gardens. The day of Helen's birthday dawned with a special light. Sophie woke up early, before the alarm clock even went off, and found Richard already on the balcony, organizing the pots and flower seedlings they had chosen together the day before. "I found another passage in the diaries," she said, still in her pajamas, holding one of Helen's notebooks. "About the garden she dreamed of having?" Richard smiled, wiping his soil-covered hands. "Read it to me?" Sophie sat in one of the balcony chairs and opened the diary. "Today I dreamed of a garden full of colors. Red roses like the love I feel for Richard, white daisies like the purity of my unborn baby's smile, purple violets like the mystery of the future that awaits us." Michael appeared at the balcony door, carrying his sketchbook. Over the past few days, he had worked in secret on a special project, a series of illustrations of Helen's imaginary garden, based on the descriptions from the diaries. "I brought the final project," he announced, showing the carefully elaborated pages. Each flower in the place she described. Richard examined the drawings, impressed with the attention to detail. Michael had created not just a garden, but a story in colors and shapes, each plant representing a moment, a memory, a feeling. "Shall we start?" Sophie asked, already picking up one of the rose seedlings. "Mom always said gardens are better when planted with love." During the next few hours, the three worked in harmony, transforming the balcony into a small, flowery paradise. Richard dug the holes in the pots, Sophie planted the seedlings with almost reverent care, and Michael organized everything following his artistic project. "Look what I brought," Richard said at one point, taking something from his pocket. It was a small metal plaque delicately engraved, "Helen's Garden, where love blooms eternally." Sophie's eyes teared up as she read the inscription. "It's perfect, Dad." As they worked, Sophie continued reading excerpts from the diaries, as if Helen were there guiding each choice, each planting. "Flowers are like people," she read. "They need care, patience, and mainly, love to grow strong and beautiful. Like our family," Michael commented softly, adjusting a violet in its pot. The sun was already high when they finished. The balcony had been transformed into a true suspended garden, with different flowers creating a harmony of colors and aromas. In the center, the plaque shone under the daylight, and beside it Michael had placed one of his framed drawings, Helen, smiling amid the flowers, with the blue pendant necklace around her neck. "There's one more thing," Richard said, entering the apartment and returning with a small box. "I found this among your mother's things." Sophie opened the box carefully. Inside were seeds of various flowers, carefully stored in small envelopes, each with a note in Helen's handwriting. "Seeds of hope," Sophie read on the first envelope. "To plant when the heart needs to bloom again." "We can save some," suggested Michael, "to plant in the future when the garden needs new flowers." Richard watched the children examining the seeds, each envelope a promise of continuity, of new life. The pendant on Sophie's neck caught the sunlight, casting small blue reflections on the newly planted flowers. "You know what else I found in the diaries?" Sophie said, sitting among the flowery pots. "Mum wrote that gardens are like love. Even in the most difficult seasons, if you take good care, they always bloom again." "She was right," Richard replied, looking at his unlikely but perfectly united family. As always, Michael finished adjusting his drawing on the balcony wall and sat next to Sophie. "Now she has her garden," he said simply. "Yes, she does." Sophie smiled, touching the pendant, "And so do we." The gentle morning breeze slightly swayed the flowers, bringing their sweet aromas. Somehow on that transformed balcony, everyone could feel Helen's presence, not as a painful absence, but as a gentle force that continued to guide them, through her words in the diaries, through the flowers that now grew under their care, through the love she had planted in their hearts long before any seed touched the earth. Michael's aunt arrived on a rainy Thursday. Anna Clark was a woman in her early 40s, with gentle eyes that resembled her nephew's. She waited in the Eichhut apartment's living room, her restless hands showing her nervousness. "He's in the bedroom," Richard explained after serving coffee. "Sophie is with him, helping him prepare for this moment." Anna nodded, tears contained in her eyes. "I looked for him for so long. After my sister, after she passed, I completely lost contact. When I found out he was on the streets." Her voice failed, and Richard perfectly understood that pain, the same he had felt when discovering Sophie. In the bedroom, Michael nervously adjusted the new shirt that Sophie had helped choose. "What if she doesn't like me?" he whispered to his friend. "Impossible," Sophie replied with conviction, fixing his collar for the third time. "You're the nicest person I know. Besides," she smiled, "she's your blood family, just like Dad is." "My blood family." Michael looked in the mirror, seeing his reflection next to Sophie's. In the last few months he had changed, not just physically with new clothes and a proper haircut, but mainly in his gaze. The constant distrust had given way to a serenity that only true love can bring. "You'll still be my family too, right?" he asked, his voice small. "Always," Sophie promised, holding his hand. "No matter where you live or with whom, you'll always be my brother." When they finally left the bedroom, the meeting was charged with emotion. Anna stood up when she saw Michael, her hands covering her mouth to contain a sob. You're so much like your mother," she managed to say. Michael remained still for a moment, studying his aunt's face. Sophie, still holding his hand, gave a small squeeze of encouragement. "Did you know my mother well?" he asked timidly. "Oh dear," Anna smiled through tears. "I have so many stories to tell you about her. So many photos to show you." Richard and Sophie watched the scene with a mixture of joy and apprehension. Anna's genuine love for her nephew was evident, but so was everyone's concern about what this meeting would mean for the future. "I don't want to leave you," Michael said suddenly, looking at Richard and Sophie. "You're my family too." Anna looked at Richard, understanding in her eyes. "And who said you have to leave? I live just 30 minutes from here. We can build something together if you want. A bigger family. Like a garden," Sophie whispered, "that grows and expands but keeps its roots." Richard smiled at his daughter's analogy. "What do you think, Michael? We can try to find a middle ground. You can spend time with your aunt, learn your history, your family, but without losing what we've built here." Michael looked at everyone in the room, his aunt with her eyes full of love and hope, Richard with his encouraging smile, and Sophie, his first and truest friend, still holding his hand. "I'd like that," he said finally, "to have all of you." Anna approached slowly, and with infinite delicacy hugged her nephew for the first time. Sophie released her friend's hand, allowing him to return the hug. "You know," Anna said after a moment, "your mother loved art too. She painted. I have some of her paintings saved." Michael's eyes brightened. "Really, I like to draw." "He's very talented," Sophie proudly intervened. "Do you want to see the drawings he made for my mom's garden?" Anna readily accepted the invitation, and soon everyone was on the balcony, with Michael showing his illustrations while the newly planted flowers swayed gently around them. Richard observed the scene, thinking about how life had curious ways of healing old wounds. There they were, his daughter, whom destiny had hidden for so long, Michael, whom chance had brought into their lives, and now Anna, bringing with her yet another piece of the puzzle that their lives had become. Sophie approached her father, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. Richard kissed the top of her head, watching how the blue pendant shone against the garden flowers. "It's better than okay," he replied. "It's perfect." The school auditorium was packed for the talent show. Colorful panels decorated the walls, displaying students' works about their family stories. In the corner designated for Sophie and Michael, a unique exhibition caught the attention of all visitors. Michael had transformed the chosen excerpts from Helen's diaries into a series of illustrations that told a story of love, loss, and reunion. Each drawing was accompanied by words carefully selected by Sophie, creating a visual narrative that moved everyone who stopped to observe. "It's amazing how they managed to transform such a complex story into something so beautiful," commented Ms. Laura, standing beside Richard. "Each drawing seems to capture exactly the emotion of the words." Richard watched proudly as Sophie and Michael explained their project to visitors. Anna was there too, having made a point of coming to support not only her nephew, but also Sophie, with whom she had developed a caring relationship in recent weeks. "And this is the necklace," Sophie explained to a group of people, touching the pendant on her neck. "It's like a character in our story. It was through this that I found my father. And here," Michael pointed to one of his most elaborate drawings, "is the moment when the car broke down on that street. See how the clouds seem to form a path? That's how I imagined destiny working that day." An elderly lady wiped her eyes after reading one of the diary excerpts. "Your mother wrote so beautifully," she said to Sophie, "and you, dear, inherited not only her eyes, but also her gift with words." Sophie smiled, that smile that reminded Richard so much of Helen that it made his heart ache. "Thank you. You know, Mom always said that words are like seeds. They can create entire gardens when planted with love." Richard noticed a movement at the auditorium entrance. Rebecca was there, standing discreetly in the back, observing everything from a distance. She looked different, thinner without the perfect TV presenter makeup, her eyes carrying a mixture of regret and longing. Sophie saw her too, and for a moment, aunt and niece stared at each other across the crowded space. Rebecca gave a small nod, her eyes teary, but didn't approach. She respected the space her niece still needed. "Is everything okay?" Michael asked softly to his friend, noticing her distraction. Sophie nodded, instinctively pressing the pendant. "Yes, Mom wrote in the diaries that sometimes people need to completely lose themselves to find their way back to themselves. The moment was interrupted by the announcement that it was time for Sophie's special presentation. Richard sat in the front row between Anna and Ms. Laura, his heart racing with pride and emotion. Sophie climbed the small stage, the blue pendant gleaming under the lights. Michael positioned himself beside her with his sketchbook, ready to illustrate live as she spoke. "Our story," Sophie began, her voice clear and firm, "doesn't begin like most family stories. It doesn't begin with once upon a time or with dates on certificates. Our story begins with love, a love so great that not even 12 years of separation could erase it." As she spoke, Michael drew on a large paper, his quick and precise strokes giving life to her words. The audience watched in respectful silence, captured by the magic of that unique narrative. "Some might say we lost a lot of time," Sophie continued, "but Mum wrote in her diaries that time is never really lost when love is involved. It just takes different paths like a river that needs to go around mountains before reaching the sea." Richard watched his daughter, so small and yet so wise, transforming her story of pain into a message of hope. In the last rows, Rebecca listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. "And just like the flowers in our garden," Sophie gestured toward the drawing Michael had just completed, showing the flowery balcony of the apartment, "our family continues to grow, change, bloom, because that's what love does. It transforms empty places into gardens, strangers into family, and sad stories into tales of new beginnings." Michael finished his final drawing, a portrait of all of them together, with Helen's necklace at the center, connecting past and present. In the drawing, the garden flowers seemed to dance around them, creating a picture of colors and emotions that perfectly summarized their journey. "But most importantly," Sophie concluded, her voice soft but firm, "our story is still being written. Each day is a new page. Each smile is a new flower in the garden. Each moment together is a new chance to prove that love, when it's true, always finds its way back home." The auditorium erupted in applause. Richard couldn't contain his tears, and he wasn't the only one. Anna sobbed quietly beside him, Miss Laura smiled through tears, and even Rebecca, still at the back of the auditorium, seemed deeply touched. After the talent show, while people dispersed, Rebecca remained standing near the exit, as if her feet were stuck to the floor. Sophie, after storing her materials with Michael's help, noticed her aunt's constant presence. "Dad," she called softly, "I think I need to do something." Richard followed his daughter's gaze and immediately understood. "Are you sure?" Sophie touched the pendant, a gesture that everyone now recognized as her moment of seeking strength. Mom wrote in the diaries that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about choosing to move forward. Michael squeezed his friend's hand in silent support, and Sophie walked toward her aunt. Rebecca looked smaller, more fragile, so different from the imposing woman she used to be. "Hi, Aunt Rebecca," Sophie said simply. Rebecca swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. "Your presentation, it was beautiful, Sophie." "Thank you." Sophie hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I found some passages in Mom's diaries about when you were girls. She wrote that you used to protect her from school bullies." Rebecca let out a contained sob. I used to be different, before I let bitterness take over me." "What happened?" Sophie's question was genuine, without accusation. "Jealousy," Rebecca answered with raw honesty. "Of her beauty, of the love she found, of the ease with which people adored her. I let that feeling grow until it completely consumed me." She looked at the pendant on Sophie's neck. "Until I became someone that even I didn't recognize." Sophie was silent for a moment, processing her aunt's words. Richard and Michael watched from a distance, ready to intervene if necessary, but respecting this important moment. "You know," Sophie finally said, "we have some seeds saved. From the garden we planted for Mom. She wrote that they're seeds of hope." Rebecca looked at her niece, confused by the change of subject. "Maybe," Sophie continued, "you could come one day. Help plant some. Not now, but when you're ready, when we're all ready. Tears now flowed freely down Rebecca's face. I would really like that. It won't be easy, Sophie warned, a wisdom beyond her years in her voice. There's still a lot to heal, but Mom also wrote that gardens don't grow overnight. They need time, care, and patience. Rebecca nodded, understanding the metaphor. You're so much like her, not just in your eyes, but in your soul. That's what Dad always says, Sophie smiled slightly. I have to go now, but maybe we can talk again. Someday. I'll wait, Rebecca promised. As long as it takes. When Sophie returned to her father and Michael, Richard hugged her tightly. Your mother would be very proud of you today, he whispered. I know, Sophie replied, resting her head on her father's chest. You can feel her here, you know, in the necklace, in the words of the diaries, in the flowers of our garden. Michael, who had finished putting away his drawing materials, joined the hug. Anna approached too, smiling at the small group. How about some ice cream to celebrate? She suggested. Your presentation deserves a special celebration. As they walked out of the school, Sophie looked back one last time. Rebecca was still there, a solitary but different figure, like a flower that, after being closed for a long time, was slowly beginning to open to the light. All right? Michael asked softly. Sophie smiled, holding her friend's hand. Yes. You know what else I found in Mom's diaries? She wrote that sometimes people are like wilted flowers. They seem lifeless, but with love and care they can bloom again. Richard, overhearing the conversation, thought about how his own life had bloomed again thanks to his daughter's love. In the sky, the sun was beginning to set, painting everything with golden tones that made the blue pendant shine like a star on Sophie's neck. Autumn arrived, bringing a gentle breeze that swayed the flowers in the garden on the balcony. 6 months had passed since the talent show, and much had changed. Michael now divided his time between Richard's apartment and Anna's house, creating a routine that worked perfectly for everyone. That special afternoon, Sophie sat among the flower pots, rereading one of Helen's last diaries that she hadn't fully explored yet. Michael, who would spend the weekend with them, was drawing in his new professional sketchbook, a gift from Anna for his birthday. Look what I found, Sophie suddenly exclaimed, making Richard raise his eyes from his laptop, where he was working on his newest project, a book based on their story with illustrations by Michael. What is it? He asked, approaching. A letter, Sophie answered, holding a yellowed envelope that was hidden between the pages. It's addressed to me, but the date… Dad, she wrote this just days before she… Her voice failed, and Richard sat beside her, wrapping his shoulders with a protective arm. Michael also approached, sitting on Sophie's other side. With trembling hands, Sophie opened the envelope. My dear Sophie, if you're reading this letter, it means you've found your way back. Home to your father, to your story, to your truth. It means that love, as I've always believed, found a way to transcend all the barriers that tried to prevent it. You must have so many questions, so much anger perhaps, so much sadness for the lost time. But I want you to know that every day of your life, even those when I couldn't be physically present, you were loved. Loved by me, who carried you in my heart every moment, and loved by your father, even though he didn't know of your existence. The necklace you now wear, yes, I know it's with you because I always knew that one day you would find each other, is more than a piece of jewelry. It's a symbol of the true love your father and I shared, a love so strong that not even time and distance could erase it. Sophie, my little wise one, your name wasn't chosen by chance. I knew you would need wisdom to navigate the complicated paths that life prepared for you. But I also knew that you carried within you the same strength that made me keep fighting, even when everything seemed lost. Don't hold a grudge against your Aunt Rebecca. She is lost in her own fears and insecurities, but I believe that one day she will find her way back to the light. Forgiveness, my daughter, is not a gift we give to others. It's a gift we give to ourselves. To your father, Richard, if he is reading this with you, and something tells me he is, I want to say thank you. Thank you for never letting your heart completely harden. for keeping alive that part of you that still believed in love. Thank you for finding our daughter and for giving her the love I always dreamed she would have. Sophie, I planted many seeds throughout my life, seeds of love, of hope, of forgiveness. Some took longer to sprout, others flowered in unexpected ways. But the most precious seed I planted was you, my daughter. And now, seeing through your eyes, the same eyes your father loved so much in me, I know that this seed found the perfect garden to flourish. Take care of your father. Take care of your heart. And always remember, true love is like the most resilient flowers. It may seem to have withered during winter, but when spring comes, it always blooms again. With all my love forever, Mom. The silence that followed the reading was filled only by the soft rustling of leaves dancing in the breeze and the occasional contained sob from Sophie. Richard embraced his daughter, his own tears falling silently, while Michael discreetly began to draw, capturing that moment of profound emotion in his delicate strokes. She knew, Sophie finally whispered. She always knew that one day we would find each other. Richard kissed the top of his daughter's head. Your mother always saw beyond what others could see. It was one of her most special gifts. Michael showed his newly completed drawing, Sophie, and Richard embraced among the flowers, with an ethereal figure of Helen hovering over them, her gentle smile eternalized on paper. The necklace on Sophie's neck was especially highlighted, shining like a small star. I think she's still here, Michael said softly. In every flower we plant, in every word from the diaries, in every beat of your heart, Sophie. Sophie touched, the blue pendant, a smile emerging through the tears. You know something? I think it's time we plant those seeds of hope she saved, including... She hesitated for a moment. I think we can invite Aunt Rebecca to help. Richard looked at his daughter with admiration. In moments like this, he clearly saw the wisdom that Helen had mentioned in the letter, a wisdom that went beyond age, born of love and deep understanding of the human heart. 1 year after the car broke down on that forgotten street, Richard's apartment balcony was unrecognizable. The garden had grown and expanded, transforming the space into a true urban oasis. Helen's flowers bloomed in all their glory, their colors and aromas telling stories of love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. It was a special Sunday, the day chosen to plant the last seeds that Helen had saved. Sophie, wearing a flowery dress and the inseparable necklace with the blue pendant, organized the small envelopes with the seeds, each with its own message of hope written by her mother's hand. Michael, who now harmoniously divided his time between two homes full of love, prepared to document the moment with his drawings. His talent had flourished as much as the garden. His illustrations now decorated not only the apartment, but also Anna's house, and surprisingly, a small space in Rebecca's living room. Anna arrived bringing homemade cakes, her always welcome, presents adding more warmth to that family that grew in unexpected ways. And then, to the surprise of many but not Sophie, Rebecca appeared, bringing a pot of violets, Helen's favorite flowers. Mom always said violets are flowers of reconciliation, Sophie commented softly, helping her aunt find a place for the tiniest. Rebecca, thinner and with her gray hair now embraced, smiled timidly. The past year of therapy and reflection had brought profound changes. Your mother always knew the meaning of every flower, she replied. It was as if she could read the secret language of the garden. Richard observed the scene with a full heart. His life had completely changed since that day when his luxury car broke down. The businessman focused only on success, and money had given way to a man who had found his true wealth in his daughter's love and in the unlikely family that had formed around him. Shall we begin? Sophie called, holding the first envelope of seeds. Everyone gathered around the prepared pots. Michael positioned himself with his sketchbook, ready to capture another precious moment. Anna smiled, her hands ready to help, while Rebecca kept slightly apart, still unsure of her place in that circle of love. This envelope, Sophie explained, showing Helen's delicate handwriting, says in seeds of forgiveness, to plant when the heart is ready to begin again. She looked meaningfully at Rebecca. Aunt, I think you should plant these." Rebecca caught her breath, tears shining in her eyes. With trembling hands, she accepted the seeds offered by Sophie. "Your mother," she said softly as she planted, "had the gift of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves." "Like you're doing now, Sophie," Richard commented, proud. One by one, the envelopes were opened and the seeds planted. Each carried a special message from Helen. Seeds of joy, seeds of hope, seeds of renewed love. Michael captured each moment in his drawings, his skilled hands translating emotions into strokes and colors. When they reached the last envelope, Sophie paused. "This one is special," she said. "Mom wrote, 'Seeds of the future to plant when the past doesn't hurt as much and tomorrow seems promising.'" All together, like a family united by bonds that transcended blood and surname, they planted the last seeds. The afternoon sun bathed the balcony in a golden light, making the pendant on Sophie's neck shine like a small star. "You know," Sophie said, looking at her growing garden, "I think I finally understood what Mom meant about love finding its own way. Sometimes the path is winding, passing through forgotten streets where cars break down. Tarsun, or through alleys where unlikely friends meet," completed Michael, smiling. "Or through moments of forgiveness and healing," added Rebecca softly. Richard embraced his daughter, feeling the good weight of fulfillment in his heart. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Sophie, of all of us." Sophie smiled, that smile that was so similar to Helen's that it made everyone's heart clench with emotion. "She is, Dad. She's here in every flower we plant, in every story we tell, in every bit of love we share." The day gently said goodbye, painting the sky with colors that seemed to come from Michael's drawings. On the balcony transformed into a garden, an unlikely but perfectly united family celebrated not only the planting of new seeds, but the harvest of a love that had found its way through time, lies, and distance. And there, among the flowers dancing, in the gentle breeze, Helen's spirit smiled, seeing her greatest